Salazar Farms is a fifth generation farm. My ancestors came from northern New Mexico in the 1850s, 60s, and they settled here. There was 7 brothers and sisters that came to the valley. 3 of them stayed in the area around Manassa and towards Los Cerritos, Los Rincones. 3 of the siblings went into Los Sauces area, and one of them stayed here near Conejo and Antonito. I've been ranching and farming since I was a child, but especially after I left my engineering business. I became a full-time farmer and part-time rancher. Climate change for me are the changes that have occurred over the number of years caused by greenhouse gases, but it really is reflected in changes in temperature, in precipitation, in wind, and in other aspects of that which affects our agricultural community. Well, it has impacted my farms very significantly. The water supply that we have from surface supplies is about 75% of what it used to be historically, and so that's forced me to make some changes. My main source of revenue is potatoes and then some with the small grains, but I will have to look at varieties of potatoes that are shorter season that will give me the kinds of yields and quality that I need, because the longer the season, typically, the more water that a crop requires. Trying to mitigate the impacts by being a lot more conservative in my use of water. For example, I used to grow about 500 acres of barley, and now we're down to 200 acres because 250 to 300 acres now is in conservation crops, which use less water. So going from a barley crop which uses 18 inches of water down to a conservation soil health crop of sorghum Sudan, which I can just use to put back into the soil to maintain my soil fertility. So that has been a decrease of 11 or 12 inches of water. And so I've had to look at a number of different things, and some of them I would have done on my own. But climate change, I think, has impacted some of it. I mean, we use irrigation scheduling, fairly scientific irrigation scheduling on most of our crops. We use what they call ET scheduling, so we take into account the amount of water the crops are using. We have soil moisture monitors. We've improved our irrigation systems so that we're now placing our water really close to the top of the canopy so that we have less evaporation from the surface of the crop. And we just have improved our efficiencies overall in irrigation, but it's allowed us to cut down on the amount of water that we use every year on our farm. Together we're trying to build a resilient system, which means that we have to use the water that we got coming in a way that will keep us agriculturally sustainable, but also will keep, for example, our aquifer sustainable in a way that our children and grandchildren will be able to still have a source of water for agriculture, especially here in the valley. In a number of different ways. I think if you look at the San Luis Valley as a whole, you see that there are a lot of pieces of ground that have dried up over time. That reverberates throughout the community, because if you shut down some portions of agriculture, then all your suppliers, the people who depend on agriculture in different ways, whether it be the farm workers or as I said, the suppliers, there's less income into the community, and so if there's less income, that has to be distributed in a different way. The impact has been not only physically on the ground, but also how it impacts like our tax bases and our ability to be a community that can support the population that we have. It's just become more difficult. I put a lot of detail into my planning, and I make sure that my income is there to support the expenses that I have, and so I'm really careful. Water was more plentiful, labor costs were lower. There was just a number of different factors, and that's why you see so many larger farms and so many fewer small family farms, because it's really hard to make it on the farm anymore. I think you're going to see fewer farmers around, because economy of scales plays a big part in how you can run a farming operation. You're going to see people adopting new technologies, and you're going to see changes in crops. You're going to see a number of changes. And I think the San Luis Valley, as long as we can keep our water in the valley, is resilient enough that we will be able to keep going. But there are going to be changes, just the same changes that we've seen in the past. When I started my consulting business 40 years ago, 40-some years ago, the farms were much smaller. And so that trend, I think, is going to continue. What gives me hope for the future is that community has come together when we face challenges. When we face challenges of people wanting to export water from our valley, when we face challenges with water shortages. And that's why the sub-districts, I think, a good example of how our community comes together to solve a problem. So if you look at our own sub-district, back in 2008 to 2013, we were still using 31,000 acre-feet of water within our sub-district. And over the last number of years, we've been cutting that gradually. If you look at the last number of years, we're down to 26,000 acre-feet. We're quite sure we're going to start bringing that aquifer back up, creating a sustainable aquifer. And with the water supply that we have, we'll continue to make those little decisions that will keep us in business, but allow us to live within our resource base. I can tell you that there's no greater happiness, I think, other than that of having a good family, than of planting a seed, watching those plants grow, and coming to the harvest and having a good harvest. And to me, farming is exciting. It's a passion. I love to go out and dig in the soil and pull out potatoes and look at those heads of grain and seeing, how full they are. And I think those of us that are in agriculture are in it because we love it. We're not in it because it's a big moneymaker at all. I mean, my debts are pretty significant with the bank. I just wish that our city cousins, people that aren't involved in agriculture, would know more about what happens out on the land. One of the things that amazes me is, in the 40-some years that I have been really deep into agriculture, I have seen an ethic of conservation come about that I didn't see 30 years ago. And when I see my fellow farmers trying new things, adopting the latest technologies that will help them to be better stewards of the resources, that excites me. And that is, I think if we look at the future, you're going to see our bright young farmers taking more and more of a lead. And I think we're going to see our situation becoming more sustainable than maybe we would have thought in the past.